Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to a brand new edition of Social Confoes. Diego, how are you doing today?
I'm doing all right, Jen. Look, it's been a while since we've had an evening session, not evening,
An
afternoon session.
afternoon
So
session, yeah.
uh, it's good to be back. And yeah, there's been a lot going on lately. We've had a lot of health-related topics, and
So we're
you
not
know,
going to talk about crypto. I know you want
no,
to talk a little bit
no,
about
I'm not gonna
crypto.
mention it. But I did want to make the link, like with all that's going on in that space, and the mental tax it puts on people, especially when it concerns finances, money. Uh, it doesn't matter what. Like keeping yourself mentally in check is very important. So I checked in with a bunch of people I know who are affected in this space to see how they're doing. Um,
Good,
but
good
yeah,
for you. No, that's good. I'm actually still in the office, and only now, like today, I noticed there's a little message by Doreen, which she left here when she left Suriname. She left a little message at the office, which is
oh, that's
really,
nice. Yeah,
really nice.
that was a week ago. Was it?
Yeah,
Oh, it's
yeah.
almost two
So
weeks now
yeah,
that the conference was here.
and she put like a little side note for the people that are really attentive in the office for them to figure
Awesome.
out. So Diego, I have
Um,
to be honest. I'm usually not like, yeah. Our guest for today, like from a scientific perspective, I'm a little bit awestruck, to be honest, um, because
yeah.
of the
So,
level of experience. So go ahead and do your introduction.
without further ado, we are joined today by Dr. Jacqueline Corcoran. Uh, she is a therapist based in Arlington, DC, at the Behavior Therapy Institute. So we are going to dive in very scientifically on how to navigate mental health. And she specializes in treating anxiety, depression, trauma, PTSD, and insomnia. That one might actually be useful for me because I've been having
Yeah, the
trouble
insomnia
sleeping.
part, we're gonna get into that one.
And so she also works with parents on parenting challenges and helping their children. Dr. Corcoran is a CBT expert with over 30 years of experience providing psychotherapy, training, teaching, and conducting research. That's a whole lot to swallow. So I'm going to keep it brief here. So I want to welcome Dr. Jacqueline to our show. If you could pop her up.
Yes, no problem. Welcome, Jacqueline. How
Welcome
are
to
you
Social
doing?
Confoes.
Thank you for having me here. Hi.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
as we
a
we
tenured
were doing
professor,
some.
it's for us, it's like that's something special for us. I want to dive right in because Diego mentioned the insomnia part. So um, whether it's from a scientific level or just common research like popular research, um, insomnia is it something that's created by your environment or more created by your personal, how would you say, your personal routine or personal treats?
Well, I think, most things are sort of a combination. We're born with certain traits
Mm.
or disposition, and then we have an environment that brings out some of these same traits. Like some of us just I have a history in my family too of insomnia, like on my father's side. So I sort of came with some predisposition to that, and then life events happen, and that is kind of a synergy that happens. And so, yeah, some people I think are more disposed to going through insomnia. So I know firsthand as well as treating people about that.
And do you have to be careful to list because often people are like, yeah, I have insomnia, but it's just a routine that's not working for them. So when can you speak from insomnia? What are the the recognizable threats that you can have that you're like, okay, now this is something that I really should consider getting help for?
Well, you mean like how do you handle insomnia if it
Or
pops up?
when do you feel like you have to actually handle it or seek help? What's at what stage do you feel like, okay, this is actually getting out of hand, or this is actually a problem for me to function in real life?
Well, I've had people come to me just for that. I mean, usually it's in the context of some other problem, like depression, for instance. One symptom of depression is insomnia. And same with anxiety. You know, you can have certain brands of anxiety that have sleeplessness as part of them. So often it's a symptom of something else. So rarely, but occasionally I've had people come just for the insomnia. And, it's developed into a habit of sorts by then. And by the time someone comes specifically for help with that and only that, it's pretty disruptive to their lives. Like some people are only getting like 2 hours of sleep, or they can't go into work in the morning because, by the time they've finally gotten to sleep, it's only a few hours and they realize there's just no way I can do my work the way I'm feeling. I'll have to call in and try to sleep a little bit more. So some people have been afflicted to that point, where they have a lot to do and their jobs are on the line, and they have to get it together. But some people just suffer through. Like, you'd be surprised at some people who are just kind of not getting by on very much sleep at all. You wouldn't know by looking at them, but they're sort of tortured by this.
So in my case, I have like the past few months trouble sleeping earlier than like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. But that's, I think, because I traveled quite a bit into different time zones, so like
Mhm.
a few months ago. And then when I got back, I kind of kept that rhythm, and also uh, being active online in different spaces, chatting with people, checking the news. It kind of stuck with it. But what I've noticed is I usually take a like 2 3 hour nap in the afternoon uh, to sleep. So is that would that still be considered insomnia of not getting enough sleep, or is that something different as the sleeps get spread out in different chunks of the day?
Well, as long as that works for you, it's fine. So if you feel like all over you're getting what you need to get done and you're still maintaining everything, you feel fine,
Yeah.
then that seems to be working for you. You usually if it's not working because you're in a great deal of pain, distress, suffering. There's a lot of that, and it doesn't sound like that's the
Yeah,
case.
no, I don't really have any like physical. I do feel like when I'm getting sleepy, and I just take those hours, but then throughout the rest of the day, it's pretty okay. But it's
Yes.
not the regular, like, night
Well, if it
to
works for
day
you,
cycle.
I'd say that's okay then.
Yeah.
You're getting what you need. It's probably a little unconventional, and you've got
Yeah.
the kind of work that supports that, because not everyone can have a 3-hour nap in the afternoon when they're, trying to get something done at work.
Yeah.
So, for you, it works.
Okay.
So,
No,
Hmm.
makes
so
sense.
to dive a little bit into that, because I think I don't remember if it was last week or the episode so before it, but we start realizing that with science, a lot of things are like it's research, and there are of course parameters to make sure whether it's a valid research or not. And recently we've noticed like there are a lot of outliers, and of course the outliers are outliers for a reason. But we also notice that from a scientific perspective, there's almost never 100%. So there's never 100% the system that works for everybody.
Right.
So especially for someone who has been in science for such a long time, um, have you noticed a shift towards more and more people being like, oh, I want to figure this out for myself. Hey, I feel like um, on one side, yes, there's a status quo, but on the other, I feel like I'm struggling with symptoms which the research is not taking into account. And to what extent is that also a danger towards finding solutions for stress and other things that have serious consequences for our mental health?
Well, I mean, I think people just feel distress. Like they don't know if their condition or how they're feeling necessarily has been researched, or sometimes they don't know the name for what they have. And sometimes a name is just a label, right? It doesn't describe the experience completely of a person's experience. So I think distress is what people, that's what brings them in to get help, is that they're experiencing a lot of pain and suffering on a daily basis or almost a daily basis, and it's just too much to live with.
So you specifically mentioned distress, like the term distress, a few times now, and as we've heard before, like usually people just complain about stress. It's either it's affecting their health or body, but you specifically mentioned distress. Could you like break that down? How that is separate or like more defining than just stress in general?
Well, I think stress is sort of a natural part of life, right? Like things don't go as we want them to, and we have these great plans and ideas, and then they're not so easy, and things take longer than we think, and somebody disappoints us. So, I mean, these are the kinds of things that are routine for everybody, right? Or you can think of as like daily hassles and things not working out, and so you know, stress to that is going to be normal, right? Like everyone gets disappointed daily and they get frustrated daily, but you're not kind of caught in that state to the point where it's painful and it hurts. You're able to move on, or, complain about it to someone and then get it off your chest, and you just kind of go to the next task, and it doesn't kind of bog you down. But when someone's distressed, I think of it as just, very much in pain. Like it's very painful to get through the day. It really hurts on an emotional level. And so I think, that sends people in to get treatment, that subjective feeling of just really feeling miserable.
So
So
that would be like a signal, like it's not just normal stress, like the pain factor, like the emotional pain. That is the symptom or signal, like okay, you really need to um, check in with a
Yes.
professional or someone.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
especially when that goes on for a time.
right.
so so is but the question is, isn't that a little bit too late? Isn't it
Mm.
better to, like, when you're already feeling the stress come up, avoid that there's actual pain involved as well? And this also ties into Shamil's questions. Armela, yes, you are allowed to ask questions, so feel free to ask questions as well. But it also kind of ties into Shamil's question. So if insomnia is left untreated, does it lead to sleep paralysis? Or, and in a broader sense, what are the dangers if you don't seek treatment when you're clearly already in the distress phase?
Well, I mean, I think that is what gets people in, is the distress. I don't know if people, because I think, we all handle stress. Like every human being has stress, even babies have stress. We think they're so happy, but I heard the tantruming before, and kids aren't always happy either, right? They get into their moods as well. Um, but so people have to be able to handle sort of the normal stress, like, since it's just a part of the human condition, and most people can manage that, to a degree, sometimes better or worse than other people. And then so you're saying, like, go in earlier, like as more of a preventative thing. So, and some people learn to do that over time. Like I have people coming into me that say, I had a severe bout of anxiety, and I was treated and it went well and I feel better, but I can feel it coming back again, and this time I want to be able to get a handle on it. So often it's the like experience that teaches that to people. I'm not sure people are going out and getting treatment for prevention unless it gets to a point of, again, just that feeling of pain, or someone else wants to force them into it. That's another way people get treatment, is that someone else says, I can't listen to you complain for 2 hours every night about your work, and you'll have to see. I mean, I can't be your therapist. You hear that sometimes, is that, yeah, they're managing, but like with a lot of support from their partner, let's say, but it's a big load for that person, and they might finally say, you need to do something about this. So it's often others that recognize when people need some help, very often.
So on this topic of stress, before we move on to the next thing, was it Armel asked, how do you notice that your stress is actually related to depression? And like, what's the difference between stress and depression? Like the relationship between those two?
Well, I think, stress can lead to depression, but depression is kind of, I mean, according to, I use the US Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. That's what the US uses for diagnosing mental health problems. And the rest of the world very heavily relies on the WHO, International Classification of Diseases. So we have different systems. They're similar. But like in our DSM in the United States, to diagnose a major depressive disorder, there has to be a 2-week period, and you have to have 5 symptoms or more, such as, problem sleeping, doesn't enjoy activities anymore, has suicidal thoughts, a range of those kind of symptoms. So the way we define it is by basically the time length of severe symptoms and then what those symptoms are. So we all go by some kind of classification system that, categorizes it as, okay, that's a major depressive disorder if we meet that. Stress, can be a lot of different things, and people use the term so much. But I think of it as like, just reaction to normal things that get us down on a daily basis and that kind of bums us out. And but we don't react to the point where we can't sleep and we can't eat and we go around feeling guilty. Those are other things. That's sort of another category of again, distress.
So how do we change? Because you've written 18 books.
Mm-hmm.
How many of those books are scientific books? How many of those books are like, because I think there's also a novel as well. And so what's kind of the balance between the different kind of books that you've read?
A lot of them are textbooks, for social workers and for people in the mental health field, because I just from teaching a lot of different classes throughout the years, I've had to figure out like how to get through with students, like what cases seem to help them learn about things. And I really like cases. And so a lot of my books are written with a lot of examples in them. That's something that I've really stressed in my books. And social work, at least in the United States, it has a real commitment to people who are in poverty and oppressed for various reasons. So I've tried to make sure in those books that there's examples of the kind of cases that social workers see. So people who are really having a hard time, not only psychologically, but also socially, So that's one theme of the books. And I would say those are all science-based, because I talk about research evidence for things. And these self-help books I wrote are also science-based, because they also pull on the research and current thinking about these topics. So, and actually my fiction, it was harder almost than anything I wrote, because it was a romantic suspense, and I decided to set it in France, which I don't really know very well. And people were speaking French, and I had 3 years of high school French. That's it. So, and I set it in the art history world, which is not my field. So, I mean, that certainly took research on my part to try to get all those things straight. That was an ambitious project.
It does sound like
I'm
fun.
actually curious to know, like, from going from science, like, to the opposite spectrum of the art world, and placing like was there something that triggered that interest in that, or was it like a scientific, like on a meta level, to see on yourself like how you would react to putting yourself in that position? Like, I'm curious to know the thought process that went behind that,
Well,
or afterwards how you evaluated that.
well, I've been writing fiction for a long time, so it's something that I've been doing. It's just a very tough kind of business to get into. So I've been doing the creative writing for decades, and right now my process is, I have a lot of projects going, and some of them are more, science based, like you're talking about, like the textbooks and even the self help, and then I'll get tired of writing it. It starts to feel so dry. And then I switch to the creative, but then like it gets very hard to make up new things out of thin air. So then I get frustrated because I get hit a dead end. Then I switch back. So I just am constantly juggling, and I get sick of one thing and move to another. And it kind of, the right and left brain then are kept kind of happy.
Yeah, that's a great solution as well. So, do you have you found a system for yourself that works, like certain time periods or days of the week that work best for you to work on each one or the other one?
No, it's not that. It's more of a feel. It's just
Yeah.
more how I'm feeling that day. I mean, I work a lot and I work most of the time, but within that, other than that, I decide kind of which projects are priorities. Of course, I also am working, so it means that sometimes priorities are put on me, right? Like I have to do certain things and get certain reports out, or meet with people and all of that. So, there's some structure in there, but I have a lot of control over structuring my time. And sometimes that's not a good thing, right? Because it's kind of isolating and lonely, but I also have a lot of freedom and to work with the rhythms that I have, because, sometimes you just don't feel it. And there's no point in banging your head against a wall. You might as well do something else.
Yeah, the mythical creative block.
Oh, yes. Well, I feel it, but then I just switch to something else where I'm not blocked right now.
Right. So on the topic of books, you shared like two with us from the beginning. One of them is changing negative self-talk and setting boundaries. And I want to link that with what we just talked about in the beginning, because you are a CBT expert, like cognitive behavior therapy.
Mhm.
And I'm curious to know like how, like something like negative self-talk, or how that can, how you can influence that through a therapeutic sense, like changing the behavior of someone, like, because it's just a perception of the person, how they see themselves, or like what they project, right? And that influences how they feel and how they behave. So from your background, like how does that work?
Well, what in the book, what I'm talking about there is just how to become more aware of when your thinking isn't very helpful. That's the first step. Because most of us kind of go around with our self-talk, I mean, it can be murmuring away, and sometimes it's just really negative. And apparently we have a sort of a negativity bias, all of us do, because of maybe evolution. Like, maybe those are the people who survived, who were scared of everything and worried about things and saw the negative, like saw things creeping around, and therefore were prepared. So we all have this negativity bias. I mean, that's been shown over and over again. It's of course to a degree, like some people have it more, some people have it less. So we tend to have sort of a negative self-talk as well, or we notice more the stuff that's negative than the stuff that's positive. I teach, and so if a student says something positive, I mean, I like it. But if a student says something negative, like on an evaluation, like that's all I can think of, right? And then discounting all the nice things that were said, but like that fills my mind. And unfortunately, that's sort of normal, in a lot of people. And
So
so first of all, it's just becoming aware of the way your thoughts are going, and the patterns that you have, like whether it is kind of negative or down on yourself or down on other people. So the first thing is just awareness. And a lot of it is then, I have some sheets in there, and I don't want to make it like give people too much work, but I noticed that writing things down really helps because thoughts are so abstract, right? And we can't see them. They're very nebulous. It's sort of hard to get a hold of them. But I find that writing things down helps people get their thoughts outside of them so they can actually look at them and kind of see like what's going on here. What am I telling myself? And then you can work with them more easily, and you can kind of see a theme to them and then work on shifting them. And at first it's kind of artificial, like to say, oh, well, all these other students found this class very helpful, and it was only actually 2 people out of the 20 that didn't like it at all, and just being able to be more realistic in your thinking. It doesn't have to be like Pollyanna or super positive. There's a term now called toxic positivity. Yeah, that's a new one, but it basically means just to tell people like, oh, just look on the bright side. And that, when people tell you look on the bright side and you feel depressed, you just want to smack them. It's like the worst thing you can possibly
right,
do.
but I do have to ask the question now. What's the worst feedback that you've received as a professor?
Oh, geez. Now you're opening up another can of worms. Um, Too much work, that I don't care, like when you tell a social worker they don't care, it's like it's like a
Oh,
stake
that
in
hurts.
the heart.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's like
yeah.
that's one of the worst things you can say to people, or I wasn't clear on directions, or those are the kinds of things that are just like that's so unfair.
I think personally for me, and it was very valid feedback, that I talked too much. So there weren't enough breaks for the students to catch up with all the information that I was giving.
Oh,
So, and it was really, and I
well,
think in my
concrete
first,
feedback can be
yeah,
good.
that
Yeah.
was, that was, but
Uh-huh.
it hurt at first. I was like,
Yeah, it
oh,
hurt.
but
I
yeah, I
know.
could. So transitioning that toxic thinking and that thinking in a negative negative light. You in your book you kind of also mentioned different ways to stimulate and figure out what are triggers and what are painful feelings, and also setting boundaries. So is this what is the solution to the toxic thinking? So where do you start? What's the first thing that once you're aware of, oh, I'm having these thoughts which are negative but they don't necessarily have to be, what's the next step?
Well, just trying to look at things rationally, I guess, having a sort of a way to, and rational doesn't always resonate with everyone, but that's the original CBT language is rational. I like to think of it as just, realistic or helpful. So, like let's say I'm reading my evaluations, which I have to be very strong for, by the way. But so let's say I'm reading them and I see a negative comment, I'll have to start saying, that's only one person who's writing that, the rest seem to be okay with this class, or just sort of taking in things so you have a more reasonable way of talking to yourself that's not so like overly dramatic. Like I have students doing exercises around this in class, and they'll just notice that sometimes their thinking is just so overly dramatic, like I'm going to fail, and it's like, who has failed that, and they're like, well, nobody. And what are you calling failure? Well, if I get a B, is a B a failure? So we have these very ridiculous, like overly dramatic thoughts at times. And so just being able to see them that way, like, oh, that's kind of funny, that's really dramatic. The truth is that, okay, maybe one person said something, but I'm not going to fail. The class went okay. So being able to speak to yourself in a way that maybe a good friend would, they can see things a little more clearly than we can sometimes when we're in the middle of it, and being able to use that same tone with ourselves.
Yeah, it's like taking a third person view at the situation, right? Like,
Yeah, a little detachment, right? Not getting sucked into this, like everything's terrible and it's all going to be terrible and it always has been terrible, just calming down and getting a little detachment. Like, is that really true? No, it's not. It's
yeah,
not terrible. Not everything is terrible right now.
because I can like understand where when you say rational thinking, approaching it rationally, because I'm more rational myself. If I
Mm.
look at how my thinking, less so emotional. But then on the other spectrum, you have people who react emotionally, and it's kind of also the frame of reference that they have for themselves. As you mentioned, a B is a failure. Like there's outward pressure, so it's kind of the context or like environment that they've created for themselves. Like how would you approach such a situation where like with people that are more like emotionally sensitive, if that's the right way to
Mhm.
say that?
Well, it's the same process, though. It's the same process of becoming aware of, in CBT, the assumption is that thinking controls a lot more things than your feelings do. I mean, I don't know if I completely buy into that because I think we sometimes do have reflexive feelings. But our thoughts can make things either okay or better or worse. So like even if you have a flat tire, which everyone would agree is just always is never good, right? No one ever wants that. So
Nobody's like, yeah, I'm ready to check
right,
and switch the
nobody will
tire.
have that reaction. So a normal reaction is to be like, oh no. But you can get like really out there with it, right? Like the day's ruined. I'll never get this fixed. No one is around to help me. You can go in this direction of like it's the worst thing ever, or like this is a pain in the neck. What am I going to do next? And once I get this solved, the rest of the day should be okay, rather than just falling prey to like, okay, it's ruined. There's no hope. There's no help. So it's the same process, but I think people who are sensitive react more strongly sometimes to stressful life events that other people can just, shake off a little easier, maybe.
So I'm really wondering because as a teenager, as a young teenager, I was a pessimist. Like I always try to downplay things and to downplay my own skills and what I was able to do. And I don't know what happened. I tried to figure it out, but I changed to a complete optimist. Like
That's
even
good.
when
That's
something
good.
goes wrong, um, seeing the positive and the learning lessons and those kind of things, and it's going straight towards the solution, which can be annoying for my wife, for instance, because she just wants to share a
And she
terrible
wants you to listen.
experience and she wants
Yes.
me to listen. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, solution mode. What
Yeah.
about this? And she's like, that's not what I want. So I'm trying to figure out like what are triggers that help people to shift, or is it a life experience that happens? So the only thing that I can think of, for instance, is that one of my friends convinced me to become part of his team, and we became youth champions in the sport. So it could also have been something like that, where I realized, like, hey, I'm
Success. Yeah.
actually
Uh-huh.
successful in something, so I should be positive, and I can have a comeback and be behind and still win. So I'm really wondering, like, what kind of scenarios or things are in place or have been scientifically proven that can switch negative mindsets towards a positive one.
Well, usually it's actually not that dramatic. Like usually someone has a tendency that's pretty early on and then it sort of takes some work to switch. So what you're describing is great that you had an experience that taught you a different mode, which is wonderful. But teenagers are a little susceptible to going in this negative direction, and partly, or a lot of it actually, is the fact that they cognitively have developed to the point where they can look at events and start to look into the future, because before thinking is so concrete that it has to be kind of nowish, and then teenagers start to be able to look into the future and the past, and then with that sometimes can become the negativity, like there's nothing going to be good here, it's hopeless, and this has been terrible. And so, you know, with the increased cognitive ability is also the increased ability to feel depression. And teenagers actually, that's when the depression starts really rising compared to what it is in childhood.
Can you repeat that? In increase in cognitivity can
Well,
also
it's
have an
in,
increase. Yeah.
yes,
Can you
because,
explain that relation?
yeah, because, you know, so children are concrete. That's they're at the point of concrete operational thought, meaning you have to have things in front of you. You know, it's you know, like a lot of little kids, they don't want to talk to you on the phone if they can't see you because it doesn't really even feel like you. Like they're just very concrete. It has to
Yeah,
be
they want to
very
touch
concrete.
and
Yes.
play and
Otherwise,
feel.
it's like
Yeah.
it doesn't feel like it's very real. And then when people become teenagers, their thinking actually advances. They finally have more ability to look into the future when they think and to look into the past. And so their thinking is much more evolved in that sense. And it's just sort of a natural process. But with that becomes this increased tendency to start going, yeah, that was never any good. And when did all the bad stuff happen anyway? And probably nothing good is going to happen. And it's not all teenagers, but you know, the depression rates really start rising in teenagers, and that's worldwide. And there's other reasons as well, but it's partly because of the cognitive capacity.
So they have the ability or the capacity to create like a fiction for
Right,
themselves.
like a
Right.
scenario
Yeah.
that goes down a real negative track sometimes.
I'm I'm going off track for a second here because Jean-Luc and I are very much interested in, if you're looking technologically in the virtual space, metaverse, social media, for example. It's something that's been like the past 10 years, that's been a very important mode of communication and keeping in touch with each other, right? And now it's even going further. So I'm curious to know, as you mentioned, this increased cognitive capacity creates the ability to, fictionalize or fantasize or abstract like physical things into the mind. Like I'm curious to know how the role one social media has in this space, like this digital distance communication. And I'm not sure how familiar you are with the metaverse developments, but if you're looking at how like a virtual
Yeah,
world,
virtual
like how
world.
people, yeah, basically a virtual world, because there everything is kind of made up. It's not tactile, but you see it as right in front of you. So I'm curious to know if you have any thoughts on those two aspects.
Well, I don't, because I don't really know very much about it, you know. All I know, and this is much more, you know, down to earth than what you're talking about, is that, you know, telehealth has really been a silver lining of the pandemic. And I think it's allowed people to get more help. So just the digital, you know, before everyone was always like, yeah, insurance isn't going to pay for it. We can't do it. You know, everyone was very against it. And then we found out we actually can, and it can improve access a lot. And the research shows that telehealth is as effective as in-person therapy, and different internet therapies can be as effective as well. So it's very interesting. I think it's therapists who don't want to really do it. I mean, that's true for myself. I just mentioned before when we were talking, just
Yeah.
I'm on the computer so much with my other kind of work, my writing and everything else. I don't want to do more computer work. Like it's just too much, you know? But, and so I think therapists generally prefer the in person, but clients really don't mind. And they're just really happy to not have to schlep or have transportation or figure out childcare. There's a lot of barriers to getting help. So I'm not as big on the whole, you know, I don't know. I mean, I can see possibilities for, you know, if people are anxious about a certain thing, that they do some kind of what's called exposure virtually. You know, I'm sure there's all sorts of possibilities there, but you know, I don't know anyone who's doing
It's
that.
it's also in the line of thinking because we get back to the toxic thinking. It's like the idea of the internet, for example, was a positive. It was like to
Mm,
share information, and then how it's being used is then again, it's uh, there are people doing it. It's not like the system, social media itself, is the establisher of fake news. It is people who, with certain intents, share news that it either wasn't researched or is just completely fake. So, and I love how you gave a positive spin on it, because just like we have fake news, there's also new news and information coming in through the same technology that could actually help mankind. So it does feel like it's interesting, because we have been down this path before. We've been down this path with television. Like I studied leisure studies, and the thing was like, yeah, the television is gonna ruin the future of our children. And
mm,
before it was television, it was like radio is gonna ruin the future of our children. So I think from a technological standpoint, that will always be there. But
mm.
I love how you also mentioned, like, okay, there's a positive side, because telehealth, it shows opportunities that we previously thought that weren't possible. Now, if there's a certain mental condition where previously you would have to call a colleague, and sometimes even an overseas call, to call a colleague, and then the colleague wasn't in, so you couldn't get the information you needed straight away. And now it's basically just one video call away to a medical expert or somebody in a completely different part of the world who will be able to help you with a case. So I do feel at a certain point that it's about how do you approach it. Um, my question now is, because I saw a lot of information on setting boundaries for yourself. So, just to give people tuning in a clear idea of what's meant by these boundaries, how are those boundaries defined?
Well, yeah, that's a good question because they're also it's another thing that's invisible, right? Um, and so probably we could all disagree on like what healthy boundaries are, but kind of they're invisible lines around yourself and to protect yourself, really, I would say, at the simplest level. And they kind of govern how close people are going to come to you, how they're going to treat you, what they're going to do with you, what they're going to assume about you. um, so that's what I would call boundaries, and they came from family therapy originally.
Okay, because a little bit personal, but like yesterday, my wife and I had many discussions, and then you get to the questions of boundaries, and also to especially if you live together with people, um, how do you go about certain boundaries? Because on one hand, you want to experience a full life, you want to get the most out of your life. On the other hand, you want to take care of your mental health, and you're both working, you have children, so you have to at a certain point set up boundaries. But it's sometimes it feels like goalpost moving, where it's you never find the perfect mix. So how do you set boundaries that actually work?
Well, I think, you have to be a little vulnerable when you're set boundaries, and you can be more vulnerable when you're doing it in the context of a personal relationship like this, and talking about whatever the feeling is. So you always start with I messages when you're trying to set boundaries, because you want to talk about whatever vulnerability is there. Like, I'm just making this up, but I'm just feel like I'm not going to be able to, I'm just feeling worried that I'm not going to be able to meet my goals if I can't spend more time on X, and let's say it's a time thing where you want to spend more time on something, just that I'm worried I'm this age and I want to be able to do this. And these are the goals that, are important to me. And so, but in order to get there, it doesn't feel like I can when I'm doing this other thing. So I would like to have, the other thing is, you talk about your iMessage and then you talk about something specific. So a specific ask is going to get better than a general ask. So like, and I need 30 more minutes in the morning to spend time on this, And when you're working in the context of an intimate partnership, then it's a negotiation, right? Like, okay, if you get that 30 minutes, I'd like to be able to do this. Well, that's too much then, so let's try to find something that we can both work with here. But you have to get a little vulnerable, I think, in order to set a boundary, because you don't want to come in accusing, which often happens, in the book, and many people have written about this. There's kind of passive on one hand, you're just letting people do whatever. Aggressive on the other hand, where you're kind of just dominating and trying to get your rights met, but at the expense of someone else. And then assertive is like, you're not trying to do anything to anyone else. You're just trying to meet your own needs that are, assumed to be reasonable. So it's a hard, no one's going to be perfect, but I think it's kind of this middle ground that we're going after, where we don't let people stomp on us, but we also don't let people, dominate people and stomp on them either. And people sometimes swing from one to the other. Like, they'll be so passive, and then suddenly they've had enough, and then it's just like, yeah. And it's like, where
Yeah,
did that
that's
come
me.
from?
Yeah,
Oh,
that's
okay.
me.
'Cause then
Yeah.
but I don't even know where that came from.
I can go from 0 to 100 really quick. If you just push the wrong
Yeah,
button, it
yeah.
just explodes.
And then for a
Yeah,
while, though, you were really nice, and
yeah.
so so that's, you want to try to just go in the middle ground, because that prevents that kind of thing. Because you've been, too nice for too long, and then suddenly it's like, okay, enough. I can't take it anymore.
So there's usually like a compromise, right? Like a certain level of understanding. And but I'm curious to know, like I've read and heard different topics on setting like non-negotiables too. Like even though you have specifically on boundaries, sometimes you also have like some things that are non-negotiable. Like you have like your values and things you won't cross. Like how important are those when setting up boundaries, like setting up these non-negotiables or
Well,
knowing your values? Like,
yeah, but I think people respond better when it's something concrete, if possible. So let's say that, because I've worked with a lot of people on this kind of thing, so it's a very common situation. Like, their bosses or supervisors piling a lot of work on them before they leave, and expecting them to stay to finish it. And so their value might be, my home life is more important than working, especially when this is not something I'm really enjoying. It's something I'm doing to get a paycheck. And so it could be, and I'm happy to work on this thing you've just given me, but I can only work on it until 5 o'clock when I leave work. So I'll have to just start on it first thing in the morning, you know and being clear and setting, so it's more concrete. Like, I'm stopping work at 5. I'll work on it until then and see how far I get, and then I can take it up in the morning when I arrive at 9.
So there's a saying, nice people finish last. And the reason I bring this up, because I'm trying to look at it from a macro perspective. Say everybody learns to set boundaries, and which is in a logical sense, it's great, because it's the idea of equality of at least input, where everybody sets the boundaries. But then you get into situations where one person is a little bit more flexible than the other, or one person likes the work a little bit more, and there's all of a sudden an imbalance. Is there a situation where you would say, like, in a perfect world, everybody sets their boundaries, and it becomes like this value measurement, what is more valuable for whom, where basically decisions are made? Or should we avoid that we get into a situation there that might actually happen? So let's, from a more practical perspective, let's take a relationship between two people. And this is often something that happens, especially in a case where two people want to have a career, or one person of the couple wants to have a career, and the other is very supportive, until there becomes a situation where there's also a little bit of ambition from the other side, and it no longer works, because the one person is already used to the other one only being a supporter. So how do you deal with certain situations like that?
Well, I mean, things are evolving with people, right? So, like, what worked before is not always going to work as people evolve and change in their relationship and in themselves. So, I guess what you're describing is you have to go through a sort of a process of renegotiation, which is always not comfortable. It's not a comfortable place to be in, but it can be resolved. But it is a process of renegotiation. Like, it sounds like things had been negotiated one way and worked for a while with both people, and people were happy with it. But then, priorities shift, and so
So it
that's
shouldn't be fixed.
it shouldn't be
Because
fixed. I mean, we're
we
not
like things that are
people.
fixed. Like it's like, okay, it's that way, and we don't want to change it
Yeah, I
anymore.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the flexibility, is that, there's changing needs at different times and with different stages of children and different stages of the relationship and careers. So it does have to be renegotiated at times and shift. Although, easier said than done, and an uncomfortable process for everyone, probably, until there's a new equilibrium.
As they say, the only constant is change.
Right. Yeah. Unfortunately. Right.
The irony.
Yeah.
But
Can we change it up? So Diego, can we change it up? Can we go to over unders, or do you
yeah,
want still? Yeah.
I was to bring that in. We can do the over under, and then we can close up with two books that are coming out or published.
Yeah, they're already published, and
Oh,
then
they're already
we have
published.
another one coming out in this series too, soonish.
All right, let's kick it off with an over under first, two each. Jean-Luc, why don't you kick us off?
Okay, so overrated, underrated. For the people that don't know, it's a very simple concept. It's popularized by Gary Vaynerchuk, and basically, we'll ask our guest Jacqueline to say whether she feels something is overrated or underrated. So let's start off with something simple. Visual art.
Visual art.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my husband loves collecting art, so we have a lot here, but it's all him, really. So I would have to say, probably overappreciated.
But I see something right in your
Yes,
bag
right.
here.
It's all him. People go, "What's this?" There's something else here.
Oh wow.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, for me, public parks, overrated or underrated?
Oh, underrated. I think they're wonderful.
So since we're in that trend, beaches.
Well, at this stage of my life, overrated. And I kind of get bored at beaches sometimes, and the water just feels so empty out there. And so I can get into kind of an existential state that I don't want to. So overrated.
Yeah, it's another thing that changes over time, right, Jean-Luc?
Yeah,
It,
maybe.
it sounds like it. It definitely sounds like it.
Yeah.
Okay, and the last one for me, babysitting, overrated or underrated?
Oh, well, I did my share of that too. I'd probably overrated. That's hard. Children are hard.
Fair point. Yeah, I had to babysit today, so
Oh,
that's
okay.
why.
It's hard. It's very hard.
So is it now underrated or overrated?
It's overrated.
Oh, okay. Well,
Maybe how hard it is underrated.
yeah, that does sound like it.
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah,
The
yeah.
amount of work it takes is definitely underrated. It's not a cakewalk.
All right, fair point. And then I think we can close it off talking about a bit about the books that you have lined up for us. We already mentioned one, like the negative self-talk and setting boundaries. The other one we briefly touched was positive thinking.
Yeah,
Uh,
that's quite different. So that basically are prompts for every day for 90 days. And they're not like be positive. It asks a question usually about your day or about your life, but it asks things so that it cultivates a perspective that's more growth oriented. For instance, let's say I like one of the prompts is, think about something that didn't go your way today. That's always going to happen, right?
So it's
So
more like action oriented, like a
It's
yeah,
kind of
well,
a
it's more
word book.
perspective.
yeah.
Yes, it's a
Yeah.
workbook, and it's like, so what did you do to be able to get past that today? So it might ask about, a so-called negative, but it asks you like, how were you able to manage that? Like, what did you draw on? Your resources internally or your supports externally to manage the stress that happened today. So it asks all sorts of questions and it draws from different traditions, but mostly positive psychology, so that you have to answer the question. But as you answer it, you're going to get a different way of looking at it.
Awesome. So I just put it on the screen. If you just look that up on Amazon, it's already on Amazon. You'll
Mhm.
find it immediately. And the other one was changing negative self-talk and setting boundaries, which we kind of talked quite a bit about.
Mhm.
Um, and then you also mentioned there's another one coming up. So what's that about? Is that the nonfiction or?
Well, there's a few things coming up, but in this series, the last one, and I don't know the title exactly, but something like, it might be something like the advantages and disadvantages of depression. It's going to be more focused on depression, and it's going to take one technique, which is examining pros and cons and applying it to different aspects of depression. The idea is that when people are depressed, they can't take in a whole lot. But if you give them one tool that they can use in different ways, it might help them. And then it also looks at we call it secondary gain. It's sometimes when people have problems that are chronic, they get something out of it, you know, and so it actually hinders them from getting better. Like let's say someone doesn't have to go grocery shopping anymore because they say they're too anxious to go grocery shopping and they get panic attacks. Okay, so now the spouse ends up doing everything, going out of the house, doing the shopping, and the person might not even be conscious of it, the one who's having the anxiety. But one nice thing about being so anxious is I don't have to go grocery shopping anymore. So that's called secondary gain, or when you get a lot of attention, like, oh, you poor thing.
Yeah, I was about to ask when you mentioned the title, like the positives and negatives, pros and cons of depression. So I was about to ask, like, what's the positive thing about
Well,
depression?
I have to be careful because I don't want to
Yeah,
minimize anyone's pain or
right.
distress, but people do have to make sure that there's not any secondary gain operating, because you want to you want to cover that, because you don't want these little subconscious things to sneak back up on you and talk you into like, no, don't change because you're getting a lot out of this.
That's really interesting. Yeah. I never looked at it from that perspective.
Well,
But how do you recognize the secondary gains? Like, that's also, I feel, something that people will tell you, or
people
yeah,
will see it before you see it.
yeah.
Yeah. So other people see it. I mean, a therapist would see it. And sometimes people in life will see it too. But yeah, that person themselves might be blind to it. So, so that's why I have to be very careful in my language, because I don't want to be blaming. That's going to make anyone who feels depressed much worse. I'm just saying, make sure the closet is clean there, because you don't want it to come back on you and hold you back, without you're realizing it.
Okay. I have one final question, and this is to go full circle where we started. So, say somebody, not necessarily me or Diego, wants to go to bed every night before midnight. What would set the stage for that person to succeed or have the highest percentage of succeeding?
You mean for themselves, or is this a
Yes, for
boundary issue?
themselves. So you want to say, like, hey, for the next month or for the rest of 2022, I want to be able to at least be lying down in bed at midnight.
Well, you have to start earlier, obviously, because you just have to start sort of winding it down.
Yeah.
So you start earlier. I mean, if we're talking about insomnia, you theoretically, you're not really supposed to be on your phone or on any computer an hour before if you have problems sleeping, because you're supposed to, get rid of that certain light that influences some people's sleep. So, I mean, if you're doing something like that, then you have to make sure that your work or whatever you were doing online is finished. So I think you have to, consider earlier what you need to get done before you go to bed. And I think like getting trapped on TV shows or going down rabbit holes or whatever you have to be aware of your tendency and try to set up the environment so it doesn't suck you back in to whatever it is that for you is your thing. So sometimes like an environmental setup will help with that, like just making sure the TV's off by a certain time so you can't just go on automatic and keep watching it over and over again. But midnight isn't that early. For some people it'd be like, midnight, are you kidding me? I mean, that's more like, I'm fine with that, but I know a lot of people would be like, we're talking about 10 o'clock.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good place to end it, like midnight, 10 o'clock. It's a personal preference,
Right, it's a
based on
personal preference.
based
Yeah.
on
Sure,
also
yeah.
your rhythm and
Yeah.
type of life. But we've just hit the hour mark, and it's been great having you on, Jacqueline, and
Yes, thank
especially
you.
getting that perspective on starting with stress management, going through the process of framing your cognitive thoughts, and then ending with the boundaries, which I think will definitely help people be more conscious on their behavior, and also to reach out to someone else or a specialist, a therapist or whatever, once they start feeling these signals early on, to one, either identify if it's really something going forward, or just to check in. With that being said, Jean-Luc, any final thoughts, words, and then
Yes,
wrap it
this has
up?
been another interesting episode of Social Confoes. We want to thank Jackie for joining us. It was a pleasure to have you as our guest. And as always, these episodes will be available on all streaming platforms in about a week's notice. Thank you for watching Social Confoes, and see you next time. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.